The rain fell like broken glass over the sweeping estate of Willow Creek, a mansion tucked deep into the hills of Vermont, where every window was framed with mahogany and every room whispered wealth. It was a place that could silence the world's chaos until tonight. Richard Halden, a self-made millionaire in his early 40s, gripped the steering wheel of his black Mercedes tighter as he pulled into the long driveway. The trees trembled with the wind. Thunder roared, and the headlights cut through the sheet of rain like knives. And that's when he saw them. Three small figures stood at the front gates, soaked to the bone. His sons, Maxwell, 11, James, 8, and little Oliver, barely 5, all in their pajamas, clutching each other in the downpour like stray animals. Richard slammed on the brakes so hard the car fishtailed slightly before coming to a halt. He jumped out, the rain soaking through his tailored suit in seconds. "What the hell?" he shouted, running to them. "What are you doing out here?" Maxwell's lips were trembling. She told us to get out." James couldn't even look up. He held Oliver close, whose face was blotchy from crying. "She locked the door, Dad," Maxwell added, eyes burning not from the rain but from shame. "We knocked for hours." Richard's world tilted on its axis. He scooped Oliver into his arms and pulled the other two close. His mind screamed, Samantha, his new wife. She was supposed to be taking care of them. They were only alone with her for the weekend while he was at a business summit in Chicago, a summit she had insisted he not cancel. A million thoughts raced through Richard's head, but none of them made sense. The boys were drenched, freezing, terrified. He carried them inside, hands shaking, blood boiling. As he opened the front door, the warmth of the marble-floored mansion wrapped around them, and so did the sound of music, jazz playing softly from the living room. He set Oliver down and marched through the halls like a man possessed. Samantha was lounging on the velvet couch, sipping red wine. A fire crackled beside her. She looked up at him like he had just interrupted a spa treatment. "Oh, you're back early," she said with a fake smile. "You left them outside," Richard growled. His voice was low, dangerous. Her smile didn't fade. "They wouldn't listen. They were fighting, breaking things. I warned them. They needed discipline." Richard took a step forward. "They're children, Sam. My children." She took a slow sip, unfazed. "And I'm your wife. Or did you forget?" That's when it hit him. The chilling calm. The indifference. The calculated cruelty behind her expensive makeup and designer robe. He had made a mistake. A massive one. But he didn't yet know just how deep the betrayal went. Richard stared at Samantha, and for the first time since he met her, he didn't see beauty. He saw a mask. And behind it, something cold, sharp, dangerous. The room was heavy with silence. "I should call the police," he said through gritted teeth. "That's child abuse." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Go ahead," she said. "Call them. Tell them your new wife put your precious boys outside after they smashed a $12,000 sculpture and tried to light candles in the library. I'm sure they'll love hearing about the kind of father who leaves 3 wild boys with a woman he barely knows for a weekend." Richard's jaw clenched. "You're lying." She tilted her head. "Am I?" His fists tightened at his sides. But he said nothing. He turned and walked away, past the massive staircase, past the portraits and chandeliers, back toward his sons. He found them in the hallway, still shivering, wrapped in towels. Maxwell looked up at him, eyes red. "Are we in trouble?" "No," Richard said, kneeling beside them. "You're going to be okay. I promise." He took them upstairs, made them hot cocoa himself, and sat with them as they slowly calmed down. Samantha never came up, not even once. That night, he slept in the boys' room, curled up on the floor beside their beds, listening to the rain and the sound of his own breaking heart. By morning, the sun had returned, but nothing felt warm. He made breakfast for the boys. Pancakes, their favorite. And while they ate, he went into his private office and made 3 calls. The first, to his lawyer. The second, to his private investigator. And the third, to a woman he hadn't spoken to in 2 years, Laura, his ex-wife. Samantha, meanwhile, stayed in the master suite, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. But by noon, Richard's investigator had already sent him a preliminary report. He opened the file on his laptop and stared in disbelief. Samantha Walters wasn't even her real name. She had 3 different aliases, 2 past bankruptcies, a marriage in Florida that ended with a restraining order, and another one, in Arizona, that was never legally dissolved. She wasn't just cruel. She was a con artist. And she'd been playing the long game with him, one that likely ended in a very profitable divorce if he hadn't come home when he did. Richard sat back in his chair, his blood ice cold. He had to get her out. Quietly. Legally. Without giving her a cent more than she deserved, which was nothing. But what he didn't know was that Samantha had already planned her next move. And it involved not just him, but his 3 sons. The next morning, Samantha was gone. Not gone like out for a walk. Gone like she had vanished. Her car wasn't in the garage. Her phone was turned off. Her jewelry was missing from the vanity. Half her clothes were gone from the walk-in closet. Richard stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, staring at the half-empty space that still smelled faintly of her perfume. His heart didn't sink, it froze. He rushed to his office, opened the hidden safe behind the painting, and immediately checked the documents inside. His property deeds were there. So were the business licenses. But the marriage agreement was missing. The prenup that protected everything he had built. Gone. God damn it. He whispered, running a hand through his hair. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer, Mark Renner, an old college friend who had guided Richard through his brutal first divorce with Laura. Mark answered on the first ring. She took the prenup, Richard said without greeting. I was afraid of that, Mark replied. Listen, Rich. I've seen her type before. Charm, marry, manipulate, then vanish and strike from the shadows. She's going to come for you. The fact that you didn't file that prenup with the court makes it worse. I trusted her, Richard muttered bitterly. Yeah, and she's going to use that trust to bleed you dry. Mark's tone turned grave. Whatever you do, don't contact her. Let me and the investigator handle it. If she gets a single message from you, she'll twist it into something to use in court. You're dealing with a professional manipulator. Richard exhaled deeply. He looked through the window at the backyard, where his boys were playing now, finally laughing again. They didn't know. They didn't need to know. Not yet. But later that night, as he tucked Oliver into bed, his youngest son whispered something that made Richard's blood run cold. Daddy, Oliver said, eyes wide and innocent. Miss Samantha said she had a new house for us. She said you wouldn't come back. She said she was going to be our real mommy now. Richard froze. What else did she say? Oliver frowned. She said we'd go on a big trip, that you'd be too busy to notice. Richard kissed his son's forehead and walked out of the room, but inside his chest, panic swirled like a storm. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about his children. And the woman he married wasn't just after his fortune. She had planned something bigger. She was going to take his sons. 2 days passed. No word from Samantha. The boys returned to school. Richard tried to keep the routine normal. Pancakes in the morning, homework at night. But every moment felt like walking on broken glass. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't focus. He kept checking security cameras, obsessively reviewing old footage. And then, it happened. Mark called. We found her. Richard stood up so fast, his office chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Where? She's in Miami. Checked into a luxury condo 2 days ago under the name Emily Rowan, one of her old aliases. She paid cash. But here's the real kicker. She's already hired a family attorney. Richard felt sick. What grounds could she possibly claim? She's alleging neglect, Mark said grimly. That you abandoned the children with her. That you've been emotionally unstable since your first divorce. She claims she tried to protect the boys from your rage, and that you flew into a violent panic the night you came home. That's insane. Yes, but in family court, perception is everything. And she's good at crafting a story. Mark hesitated before continuing. She's also filed an emergency custody request. Claims the children told her they were afraid of you. Richard couldn't breathe. That's a lie. I was the one who found them outside. She's playing the long game, Rich. She probably recorded everything. Even the fight you had when you confronted her. If she cuts the footage just right. Richard slammed his fist on the desk. Mark lowered his voice. Listen, I have a team filing a motion to block the emergency custody request. But you need to prepare. This isn't going to be clean. Richard hung up and sat in silence. That night, he went to the boys' rooms, one by one. Watched them sleep. Their faces were peaceful, unaware, innocent. And he swore to himself, right then and there, that no judge, no courtroom, no twisted lie would take them away from him. But he wasn't ready for what came the next morning. As the sun rose over Willow Creek, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out. A woman in a gray blazer followed, clipboard in hand. Child Protective Services. Mr. Halden, the woman said calmly. We've received an urgent report. We need to speak to your children. Richard's hands trembled. Because just like that, the battle had started. And Samantha had drawn first blood. The woman from Child Protective Services introduced herself as Megan Klein, her voice cool, clinical, and rehearsed. She held a leather folder in one hand and kept her tone neutral, like this was just another Tuesday. We received a report of potential child endangerment and psychological abuse, she said, standing in Richard's grand foyer, dripping from the morning rain. We're here to perform a wellness check and conduct individual interviews with the children. Richard stood tall, jaw clenched, dressed in a dark cashmere sweater and jeans, looking less like a millionaire and more like a dad caught in the middle of a storm he didn't cause. I want my lawyer present, he said. Megan nodded. You're welcome to contact counsel. But under Vermont state law, we are permitted to conduct immediate interviews when there is concern for child safety. She glanced toward the staircase. I'll need to speak to the children separately. Richard paused for a beat, then gave a small nod. They're upstairs. I'll call them down. He knew he had nothing to hide. But this wasn't about truth. It was about perception, and Samantha had poisoned the well before he even knew she was gone. One by one, the boys came downstairs. Megan spoke to them in the sunroom, each separately, while Richard stood in the hallway, pacing. Maxwell, always the serious one, was quiet but firm. James tried to make jokes, a defense mechanism. Oliver looked nervous, but he was too young to lie, and Richard knew he'd speak from the heart. It was over in an hour. Megan stepped back into the foyer with the officers behind her. Thank you for your cooperation, she said, expression unreadable. What now? Richard asked. We'll submit our initial findings to the court. You'll be notified if any further action is necessary. That's it. For now. And with that, they were gone, leaving behind silence and a chill that no fireplace could fix. Later that afternoon, Mark called again. She's not stopping, he said. She's petitioning for supervised visits. If the court believes her version of events, you could be restricted to seeing your own sons once a week in a monitored facility. Richard sat down hard on the leather couch. I have no criminal record. No history of violence. She's not going after your past. She's using your money, your mansion, your schedule. She's painting a picture. The distant, overworked father who left his kids with a poor, well-meaning woman who just wanted to keep them safe. Richard's stomach turned. How do I fight back? Mark hesitated. There's one thing. What? We dig up her past. And we find someone who's willing to testify. But who would? That's when it clicked. Richard stood up, his heart pounding. Laura, his ex-wife. The only other woman who had ever been part of his son's lives. And the only person who could destroy Samantha's lies from the inside. If he could convince her to help. But that wouldn't be easy. Because the last words Laura ever said to him were, I hope you regret replacing me. Richard hadn't spoken to Laura Halden in nearly 2 years. Not since their divorce became final. It had been a cold, calculated separation. No screaming matches, no public scandals. Just two people with too much history and too little forgiveness. She had taken a modest settlement, moved into a small home in Montpelier, and refused to ask him for anything more. She let him have primary custody. Said she didn't want the boys being raised by nannies or in courtrooms. That they deserved stability. At the time, Richard saw it as surrender. Now he saw it for what it really was, sacrifice. He pulled up to her house that evening. A charming, 2-story colonial with a slanted roof and a front yard full of fall leaves. There was no gate, no security system, no luxury car in the driveway. Just warmth. Real warmth. He knocked once. She opened the door slowly, brows lifting in surprise. Her hair was tied back. No makeup, just a faded sweater and jeans. But her eyes, sharp and tired, still carried the strength he once loved. Richard, she said flatly. I need your help, he said without preamble. She folded her arms. What could you possibly need from me? Samantha is trying to take the boys. Laura blinked. He told her everything. The night he came home, the rain, the lies, the CPS visit, the custody filing. He left nothing out. For once, there was no spin, no ego, no defensiveness. When he finished, Laura said nothing for a long time. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in. They sat at her small kitchen table. The walls were filled with school photos and handmade art from the boys. Richard looked at them like they were artifacts from a better life. She was always fake, Laura finally said. I knew at the moment she showed up at that school play in designer heels and tried to take credit for Oliver's costume. She looked at the boys like they were accessories. I didn't see it, Richard said. I wanted to believe someone could love them like I do. No one will, she said. Except me. He met her gaze. Will you testify? Laura nodded. On one condition. Anything. You don't get to play the victim anymore. You married a vulture and left our children with her while you chased deals in Chicago and Dubai. I'll help you, but not for you. For them. I understand. No, you don't, she said. But you will. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. I've been keeping a file. Photos. Notes. Texts the boys sent me. Things she said to them. I didn't want to interfere, but I couldn't sit by and do nothing. Richard stared at the folder like it was a lifeline. You had this all along, he asked. I was waiting for you to wake up. He took the folder in his hands. This changes everything, he said. Laura nodded. It better. But outside, as night fell over Vermont, Samantha was already preparing her next move. And this time, it wouldn't just be legal. She was about to expose a secret that could shatter Richard's entire case and his relationship with his oldest son. The next morning, Richard handed the folder Laura had given him to Mark. Inside were damning texts Samantha had sent Maxwell, cruel punishments, emotional manipulation, even bribes. Laura had also documented bruises on Oliver's arms after a weekend with Samantha, taken months ago and carefully hidden in her files. Mark's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. This is gold, he said. This could destroy her credibility entirely. We'll file a counterclaim and request emergency full custody. We'll flip the narrative. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt a flicker of hope, until an unmarked envelope arrived that afternoon. No return address. Hand-delivered. He opened it at his office desk. Inside was a single-page report from a private DNA lab. At first, it didn't register. Then he read the names. Test Subject A, Richard Halden. Test Subject B, Maxwell Halden. Result, 0% probability of paternity. Richard's hands went cold. He read it again. Then again. The world slowed. Maxwell wasn't his son. He staggered back, clutching the desk, as memories exploded in his mind. Maxwell's birth, his first words, his stubbornness, his intelligence, the way he'd always been different. How Laura cried harder than she ever had the night he was born. And now this. Who sent the test? Who had access? And then, the phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Samantha's voice came through the line, smooth and venomous. Now we're even. You did this, he said through clenched teeth. I told you, she said calmly. You never really knew your family. Just like you didn't really know me. He slammed the phone down so hard it cracked. 10 minutes later, Mark walked in. I just got word, Mark said. She's filed a new petition, not for custody, for parental fraud. She's trying to claim you're not the legal father of Maxwell and that you concealed it. She's using the DNA report as leverage to invalidate the prenup and paint you as a liar. Richard's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know. I believe you. But this is going to tear everything wide open. The court may appoint a guardian to investigate the household. And if they find out you've been raising a child you're not biologically related to, without legal adoption, it could complicate everything. But he's my son, Richard said. Biology doesn't change that. I know. But Samantha's not trying to win on facts. She's trying to burn you down in the media and force a settlement. Richard sat down slowly, heart pounding. He had built a life on discipline, strategy, control. Now, everything was unraveling. But one thing was certain. He would never let Samantha win. Not with lies. Not with the truth. And especially not with his son. Because Maxwell was about to learn the truth, too. And the fallout would be nuclear. Richard sat at the edge of Maxwell's bed, holding the DNA envelope in his hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His oldest son was reading a comic book, legs crossed, earbuds dangling from his neck. Max, Richard said softly. Maxwell looked up. Yeah, Dad. Richard swallowed hard. I need to tell you something. Something important. And hard. The boy put the book down, sensing the gravity in his father's voice. Richard had practiced what to say, rehearsed it over and over. But nothing sounded right. Nothing sounded like a father telling his son, I may not be your biological dad. So he just handed him the envelope. Maxwell stared at it. What is this? Just read it. The silence that followed was unbearable. Maxwell's eyes darted across the page. Then again. His lips parted. Then closed. No, he whispered. I didn't know, Max. Not until today. I swear to you. Maxwell stood up, backing away like he'd touched fire. What is this supposed to mean? You're not my dad. I am your dad, Richard said quickly. I raised you. I've loved you since the day you were born. That will never change. But you're not my real father? I'm your true father, Richard said, voice cracking. Maybe not by blood, but in every other way that counts. Maxwell looked down at the envelope, then up at Richard, fury and heartbreak swirling in his eyes. Did Mom know? Yes, Richard said. I think she always did. Maxwell threw the envelope across the room. So I'm just some mistake? Some lie you guys kept around for fun? No. Richard grabbed his hand. You are my son. You are the reason I get up in the morning. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. But Maxwell pulled away. I need to go? Max, I said I need to go. And he ran. Down the stairs. Out the front door. Richard chased him, but the boy was gone before he even reached the porch. Laura arrived 15 minutes later. Richard was still pacing the front yard, his face pale, eyes wild. I told him. Laura's face fell. And he ran. She nodded. I'll find him. Richard looked at her, desperate. Why didn't you tell me back then? I was afraid you wouldn't love him the same way, she said. That if you knew the truth, you'd treat him differently. I wouldn't have, he whispered. Not for a second. Laura gave a small, broken smile. I know that now. But back then, I didn't trust either of us. Just then, her phone buzzed. She looked down. It was a text. From an unknown number. She showed it to Richard. Your son's not running. He's with me. Attached was a photo. Maxwell, sitting in the passenger seat of Samantha's car. Looking furious. Looking betrayed. Looking lost. Richard's hands shook as he stared at the photo. His son sitting stone-faced beside the woman who had nearly destroyed their lives. The rain had started again, light and steady, like the sky itself was bracing for what came next. She has him, he whispered. She took Max. Laura grabbed her keys. We need to call the police. No, Richard said, already dialing Mark. If we call the cops, Samantha will twist it. She'll say he came willingly, that she's protecting him from us. But she's manipulating him. Laura snapped. She's using that DNA result to wedge herself into his head. That's what she does, Richard cut in grimly. She finds cracks, then drives people through them. Mark picked up on the first ring. She took Max, Richard said immediately. She sent a photo. No threats, no demands, just proof. Mark cursed. She's setting a trap. She wants you to react emotionally. Make a mistake. That way, she can claim you're unstable. Don't take the bait. I don't care about court right now, Richard snapped. I care about getting my son back. You care about both, Mark said, his voice hardening. Because if you go after her without a plan, she'll bury you. And if she poisons Maxwell's mind while you're flailing around, you might lose him for good. Richard closed his eyes. Laura put a hand on his arm. I know where she might go. He looked up. What? She once bragged to me, during the divorce, that if she ever needed to disappear, she had a place in Maine. A friend with a cabin near the water. Remote. No cell service. Do you have an address? No, but I know the town. Costini. Richard stood. Then that's where we're going. Laura frowned. You and me? I need someone Max still trusts. They left within the hour. The drive to Costini taking over 6 hours in the dark, the silence between them interrupted only by rain and the occasional hum of the GPS. They arrived at dawn. Fog rolled off the bay like ghosts. And then, they saw it. A silver SUV parked in front of a weathered wooden cabin near the cliffs. Richard killed the engine. Inside the car, Maxwell sat by a fogged-up window. Samantha stood outside, staring at the ocean. Richard's jaw clenched. We do this calmly. No, Laura said. You wait here. Before he could argue, she was already out the door. Richard watched as Laura approached Samantha, slow, calm, terrifyingly steady. They exchanged words. Then Laura pointed toward the car. Maxwell looked out. His eyes met Richard's. The boy's face trembled. And then, he opened the door. He walked toward his father. But Samantha suddenly turned, grabbed his arm, said something. Maxwell froze. He looked at Laura, then at Richard, and then back at Samantha. It was the moment. The moment everything balanced on one boy's broken heart, and the choice he made next would decide everything. The wind howled off the coast of Maine, spraying salt through the fog as Maxwell stood between the two forces that had shaped his short life, the man who raised him and the woman who deceived them all. Samantha's hand gripped his arm just tight enough to signal control. Richard stood still near the car, eyes pleading, not pushing. And Laura, standing just behind Maxwell now, was silent, a steady presence. "You don't have to go back with him," Samantha whispered, just loud enough for the boy to hear. "He's not even your real dad. You know that now. You belong with someone who chooses you." Maxwell turned his head slowly. "You think this is choosing me?" She blinked. "What do you mean? You lied. To everyone. You made me feel like trash. Like we were in your way." His voice cracked. "You threw us out into the rain." Samantha's smile slipped for the first time. "That was a misunderstanding. You boys were being reckless. I needed to teach you." "No," Maxwell interrupted. "You didn't want us around. You married my dad for money. And now you're trying to rip us all apart." She crouched, changing tactics, her voice soft and desperate. "Max, sweetheart, I love you." "No," he said firmly. "You love what you can get." He stepped back from her, walked straight into his father's arms. Richard held him tightly, eyes closed, fighting every tear threatening to fall. "I'm sorry, Max, for not telling you, for letting someone like her into our lives." Maxwell nodded into his chest. "You're my dad. That's all I care about." Samantha stood alone on the gravel path, trembling in disbelief. "I'll take this to court," she screamed. "You think this is over? You lied about paternity. I'll bury you, Richard." But this time, Richard didn't flinch. He looked her in the eyes. "You've already lost," he said, "because you never understood what love is." Laura pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Yeah," she said calmly. "She's here. Come get her." Within 20 minutes, 2 local sheriff's deputies arrived, thanks to Laura's quiet call the night before. Samantha wasn't just being investigated for emotional abuse now, but for potential kidnapping. She was arrested on the spot. Her last look wasn't one of rage, it was of disbelief. Like she couldn't fathom that the game was truly over. Richard and Laura stood beside each other, watching the car disappear into the fog. Maxwell reached for Laura's hand with one and held Richard's with the other. "Are we gonna be okay now?" he asked. Laura smiled softly. "It'll take time, but yes." And as they drove back toward Vermont, the family, fractured but unbroken, sat in a silence that finally felt peaceful. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained. Wealth can buy houses, cars, even love stories that look real on paper. But trust? Trust is earned. And once it's broken, even a millionaire can be left with nothing but the truth. 6 months later, the mansion at Willow Creek didn't feel like a monument to wealth anymore. It felt like a home. The marble floors were scratched from toy cars. The grand staircase was littered with sneakers and backpacks. The kitchen, once pristine, now smelled like waffles and burnt toast every Sunday. And Richard? He had traded suits for sweaters, conference calls for bedtime stories, investments for real time with his sons. The court case was over. Samantha had taken a plea deal, avoiding a public trial in exchange for surrendering all custody claims and staying out of Vermont permanently. She left the state with a sealed record and an ironclad restraining order. Richard didn't celebrate. He just exhaled. One evening, Maxwell walked into Richard's study holding a small box. "I found this in Mom's old stuff," he said. Inside were old photos of Laura, Richard, and Maxwell as a baby. One picture showed Richard cradling Maxwell at the hospital, looking down at him like he'd just touched the stars. "You knew, huh?" Maxwell asked. "I didn't," Richard said. "Not then. Do you wish you had?" Richard paused, then looked up at his son, now taller, stronger, older in the eyes. "No," he said, "because I might have hesitated, and I would have missed out on the best thing I ever did." Maxwell smiled. That night, the family gathered in the backyard, under string lights Laura helped put up, around a fire pit James insisted on building himself. Oliver toasted a marshmallow with laser focus. Maxwell told a joke so bad, everyone laughed anyway. And Laura, seated beside Richard, leaned back and whispered, "You did okay." "I had help," he said quietly. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because some stories don't end in explosions or headlines. Some stories end in second chances. And this time, Richard didn't miss his.